Warning: the following presentation is intended for mature audiences and it contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes, adult dialogue, and strong language. This podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and their guests, and every effort is made to ensure that information is accurate. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome, fellow armchair detectives. I'm your host, Ashley Boitis.
And I'm your host, Tamlin Rousseau.
And this is Just in Crime. Join us as we explore the issue of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa
by exploring the victims and their stories. On the 31st of December 2009, Masego Khomo told her mother that she was going to play with her friends down the road, as little girls should. Neither of them could have foreseen that on the last day of 2009, it would also be the last day of Masego's 10-year-old life, having suffered a horrific death. This is the case of Masego Khomo, and in this episode, we will be discussing Muti murder and the cases surrounding it. So before we jump into this case, I just want to preface that this case won't be as detailed as the previous cases have been. And there will also be more than one case discussed. And at the end, we will have a discussion surrounding witchcraft and sorcery. So the reason that this case is going to be done a bit differently is firstly, because as much as I enjoy cases and generally I'm good at distancing myself from them, this particular case was just too much. And let me tell you why. This episode addressed a few cases of girls under the age of 12 that were mutilated and brutally murdered, and just in order to sell their body parts to sangomas for muti. I also just want to add that this isn't an accepted practice. Sangomas shouldn't use human body parts in their rituals. In fact, it's very much frowned upon. And with that being said, not all sangomas do this. It's literally the handful that gives sangomas the bad reputation. And then the second reason behind why this will be a less detailed episode is because I feel like I have a moral and ethical obligation to not exploit these victims for entertainment value. And I don't want to subject any of our listeners to the extreme violence that these individuals have faced. I'll briefly be speaking about the murders in order to just give context to the discussion that we will have later on. And if you as an individual want to read about it, there is a link to a Google Doc in our our social media bios. And there are many articles in this Google Doc about what happened. So yeah, just know that as someone who's quite hardened to gore and murder, this particular episode was incredibly difficult, and it definitely had me in tears and left me heartbroken quite a few times. So just to put it in perspective, judges were crying to the point where they had to take breaks in the courtroom. Because, it was too hectic. But without any further ado, let's get into today's episode. So today we're in Soshanguve, which is a township that's situated about 30 kilometers north of Pretoria, which is in Gauteng. And an interesting fact about Soshanguve is that the name is actually an acronym that uses the first 2 to 3 letters of the Sotho, Shangaan, Nguni, and Venda cultures, which shows us the multi-ethnic composition of this population. And I had no idea that is where the name originated from. And I thought that was a really, really dope piece of information that I would just share with you guys. But anyway, moving on. It's the 31st of December 2009, New Year's Day. Little Masego Khomo was wearing orange vest, black leggings, plastic jelly tot sandals, and a braid in her hair. She told her mom that she was gonna go and play with a few of her friends, and later on, Brian Mangwale approached the children, and I'm assuming that he asked Masego to buy him a cold drink because she went to buy him one. And then later on, two other friends met Masego at Pinky's place where Masego was buying bunny chow.
I just want to jump in for 2.5 seconds and clear up what a bunny chow is for someone who isn't familiar to it, because it does sound a bit strange. And it just want to be clear, it doesn't consist of actual rabbit, but it's just basically considered it's a fast food dish that is a hollowed out loaf of white bread, and then it's basically just filled with curry. It's not anything too weird.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up, Ash. I wouldn't want any of our international audiences to be more concerned about South Africa than they already are. But as I was saying, Masego was at Pinky's place, and coincidentally, Brian Mangwale was also at Pinky's place and asked Masego's friend to go buy him 6 rands worth of airtime and then to give the airtime to Zoro Zoro. The other friend that was with them knew where Zoro Zoro was, so both friends left together and left Masego and Mangwale behind. Masego was still waiting for her bunny chow. This is why she stayed behind. But this is also the last time that Masego was seen alive, not only by police, but the whole community of Soshanguve. 5 suspects between the ages of 15 and 35 were arrested in regards to the kidnapping, and the suspects told police the area in which they had last seen Masego, and this is where the search started off, with members of community and police searching for Masego. A pair of pink bloodied slippers were found near a swamp that one suspect mentioned, and keep in mind, and this is keep this in mind, it's very important, the pink bloody slippers. But Masego was not wearing pink bloody slippers. That is why it is important. She was wearing plastic jelly tot sandals. It was at this point that members of the community were no longer allowed to take part in the search, because suspects were brought in to do pointing outs to show the police, obviously where they had to search. So police were actually really worried that the community might turn on the suspects, as some of the suspects' relatives had already been attacked by residents that were wanting answers. And if you're curious what a pointing out is, you should definitely go check out the case of Kamira Rajbunsi, as I explain what a pointing out is there. But members of the police diving unit and the dog unit were called in, and a police helicopter was also brought in to carry out an aerial search of the area, but to no avail. Nothing was found. The information they were receiving from the suspects, it really wasn't helpful. So the search for Masego lasted 8 days. In the early hours of the 8th of January 2010, suspects took police from a provincial task team to where Masego had been dumped. Masego's mutilated, decomposed body was found. The body was covered in a thick grey blanket. She was found with her legs spread open in the center of a clump of bushes in a field near the Soshanguve train station and the Soshanguve Hotel. Masego's body was identified by her parents and grandfather. And at this point, police were still trying to find out whether Masego was raped before her genitals were removed.
Oh, wait, they literally couldn't even conduct a rape kit because there was obviously nothing to conduct a rape kit on.
Exactly. Officers also wanted to determine at exactly what point she was murdered. Remember how I said that you should remember the pink slippers that were very important? Well, the killers of Masego Khomo are believed to be behind the murder of the 3 other young Pretoria girls. At least one of the suspects had told police about similar murders of 3 girls in the area around Soshanguve that took place in the previous month. The girls, who were all apparently between the ages of 10 and 12, were also believed to be killed for Muti. The body of one of the girls was earlier found near the Rooiwal Dam, and the other 2 were discovered in and around Hammanskraal. It is believed that the suspects who took police officers to where Masego's body was found also took them to the place where one of the girls was killed at the Rooiwal Dam. Another source said at least one of those arrested and connected with Masego's murder was believed to be involved in the sale of body parts to a Sangoma living in Soshanguve. So it is believed that the Sangoma, who was expected to appear in the Soshanguve Magistrates Court with the other suspects, was picked up for questioning after police raided his home in the township. His house was pointed out by one of the suspects. The Sangoma's appearance comes as another Soshanguve Sangoma is due to appear in court for a bail application after she was arrested in the previous year on charges of murdering her daughter, also for Muti. In Mosego's case, the suspects were due to appear in court on charges of murder and kidnapping. Depending on the outcome of the investigation and the post-mortem examination, more charges could be added against them. 3 confessions, a warning statement, and 2 pointing outs made by suspects were accepted into the court as evidence. And before we jump into the court proceedings, be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Just in Crime SA for more episodes, case-related content, updates, and other riveting content.
Also, always keep in mind we are not professionals in any of the discussed fields. If you or anyone you know is in danger, you can find resources on our social media pages. Or, alternatively, you can contact the Gender-Based Violence Command Center at 0800 428 428 or SMS help to 31531.
In the court proceedings, there was a lot of he said, she said about pointing out an assault that led to confessions, etc., you know the story. Maluleke, who was one of the officers on the case, testified that due to the detainees regularly claiming that they were assaulted, it was kind of just part of his practice to take suspects to a doctor before any type of pointing out or confessions were being made. Maluleke denied that there was any opportunity for assault or any assault that took place. Shockingly, just after 24 hours, 4 of the 5 suspects were released as charges against them were withdrawn. It was said that they did not have enough evidence to secure convictions of the 4 released suspects. The option that these 4 men could be state witnesses were discussed, and Judge Billy Motley called on 3 of the men as witnesses as he believed that they had crucial evidence that needed to be heard before a sentencing could be made. So, obviously, the community was enraged by the release of the 4 suspects, and they had to be placed in protective custody as the community already burnt down their houses, along with the implicated Sangomas. The Tshwane Metro Police had to monitor the township as the community threatened further violence against anyone else who was involved. Brian Mangwale was the 5th suspect who was not released, and he pleaded not guilty to murdering and raping the 10-year-old Mosego and selling her body parts for Muti. 3 of his co-conspirators testified against him, one of them being Albert Matabula. Matabula testified about what happened the night of Mosego's disappearance. He said that he was smoking dacha with friends on the night of December 31st, 2009, when Mangwale arrived in a car with Sangoma Yan, a woman in Sangoma's clothing, and a young child. He and 2 of his friends accompanied them to the Sangoma's house in Soshanguve. Matebula went inside with the woman who carried the child. His friends stayed in the car. He told the court that he and Mangwale were given cool drink, which contained something that made him feel dizzy, out of control, and hearing voices in his head. Matebula testified that upon entering, they found initiates and they were dressed in Sangoma clothing, he said. The lady came in with a cloth. When Jan cut her open, she did not scream. I did not see the other parts. I only saw the internal organs. When they were removing the organs, I vomited. Matebula said the child's body was later put into the car boot and he and his friends were dropped off at a party. Judge Billy Motley called 2 other witnesses to shed more light on the killings. The other witnesses, a magistrate and a senior policeman, testified that Mangwale made confessions and a pointing out to them in March the previous year about the murder and the mutilation of another young girl. They said Mangwale told them how the girl was lured into their car and taken to bushes near a river, where Sangoma, called Jan Maleka, cut out her tongue and cut off both her breasts before removing her womb. Mangwale told the magistrate he heard others had wrapped the child's body in plastic and drank muti before dumping her in the veld on the instructions of the traditional healer. Mangwale told them he was paid 4,500 rand for the job. Mangwale denied that he did a pointing out, but one of the police officers that were at the pointing out said that it appeared that he was possessed by spirits of ancestors when he voluntarily pointed out Masego's body in the veld. In one of his confessions, he said Jan, the witch doctor, asked him to find a girl younger than 12 who was not sexually active. Mangwale said in one of the statements he had been supplying children to kill for purposes of muti to two sangomas named Jan and Mabunda for a long period before December 2010, before Masego disappeared. Evidence was that the child's womb and breasts were removed while she was still alive and the body parts sold to a traditional healer. The court could not find that she was raped by Mangwale, but it did not exclude the possibility that she was raped by other culprits involved in this horrific killing. In a statement before a magistrate, which was accepted by the court, Mangwale said he, with the help of others, ripped her body open while she was still alive, before tearing out her body parts, including her uterus. He said he wrapped her organs in a plastic bag, which he hid in the bushes. While he helped her parents, the community and the police in their week-long search for her, the organs were then later sold to a sangoma.
What's disturbing is how he assisted the family and members of the community to basically go and search for Masego while he knew full well that she was dead. He basically played on the emotions of this family.
Exactly. And then a teenager who earlier took the stand behind closed doors testified that he witnessed Masego being gang raped that night, but the judge could not make a finding as his evidence was lacking in many ways. A post-mortem report could also not make a finding on this as her body was badly decomposed and she had hardly any organs left. A well-dressed Brian Mangwale stood with his head bowed as Judge Billy Motley found him guilty of kidnapping the little girl before killing her so that her body parts could be sold for money. Judge Billy Motley sentenced Mangwale to life in prison and another 6 years imprisonment for kidnapping. The judge said Mangwale did not act alone, but with the aid of other people, he killed the 10-year-old girl. Mangwale he didn't show a lot of emotion, and he smiled slightly after he was sentenced. The judge said that the manner in which Masego was killed was severely aggravating. The social workers' reports indicated that Mangwale had not shown any remorse and that he did not want to take responsibility for his actions. Judge Motley said Mangwale failed to show any remorse throughout the trial and, despite making a number of confessions about the murder, insisted he was innocent. He never told the court who his co-conspirators were. There was evidence that the girl was still alive when her womb and breasts were cut out. Because of Mangwale's actions, her family would never have closure because there was no indication of what the other people did or where they were. The judge said the extraction of body parts for use of muti to solve marital, financial, or personal problems had never been proven to be effective. Criminals who prey on the children have no place in society and must be removed for their own safety and the safety of others.
That statement's a little bit odd for me. What if it had been proven to be, effective? Would you condone it then? Who, cares if it's effective or not? It's still wrong.
Exactly. I could not have said it better myself, dude. But the Minister of Women, Children, and People with Disabilities said the following. Those out there who continue this barbaric witchcraft must know they will be met with the full force of the law. This is not traditional healing. This is murder. I agree with the judge that this muti and witchcraft is unscientific and unfounded. Those out there who continue this barbaric witchcraft must know they will be met with the full force of the law. This is not traditional healing. This is murder. The family said they were satisfied with the judgment and the sentence. In 2018, Mangwale appealed against his conviction and sentence, but he was essentially dismissed by a full bench of judges. Unfortunately, Masego's case isn't an isolated one. There are many more, like the case of 10-year-old Peter Selo. He was out herding donkeys when he disappeared and he was discovered, but he was still alive, but he was severely mutilated. His hands, genitals, tongue, and brain had been harvested. He was probably used to bring a business good luck. Or there was the case of 13-year-old Albino Gabisile Shabani, who was kidnapped from her home and then also killed for muti. And these cases that I mention are only a handful of the cases that actually happen. Most practitioners use nothing more sinister than roots and leaves to make their muti. But belief in the power of human body parts continues to feel like a demand for the other type of muti, like the bad type of muti that uses or involves murder. So body parts are actually a very big business in Africa, but particularly in South Africa, where trade in human body parts is quite lucrative. And in the race to get rich in places like Johannesburg, some people believe that the key to getting their hand on all that glitters is by taking a shortcut. So many victims can trace their gruesome murders to powerful traditional healers. Middlemen, like in the case of Masego with Mangwale, are usually the ones that handle the dirty work. Their motive may be one of two things. It's the apprentice of the traditional healer, and he's tasked by the traditional healer to go out and get the body parts, or it's someone who's being paid a certain amount of money to go out and collect, again, these certain body parts. Traditional healers don't really do the killing themselves. Like, it's very seldom that happens. But basically, the order will include not only specifications as to which particular body parts is required, for example, like testicles for fertility purposes, or like fat from the breast and abdomen for luck, or a tongue to smooth the path of a lover's heart. But anyways, as I was saying, there's a very specific manner in which all of these body parts need to be collected, and obviously the traditional healer gives the instructions. So the use of human body parts for medicinal purposes is based on the belief that it is possible to appropriate the life force of one person through its literal consumption by another. But before we start looking at muti murders, I think it is important that we look at traditional healers and what they do. So traditional healers are practitioners of traditional African medicine in South Africa. They fulfill different social and political roles in the community, including divination, healing physical, emotional, and spiritual illnesses, directing birth or death rituals, finding lost cattle, protecting warriors, counteracting witchcraft, etc.
Finding lost cattle, that seems a bit I want to say under their pay grade. You're literally healing people and then they're please go find my cows.
Well, I mean, it is for emotional and spiritual healing as well, because I'm assuming if you are not very rich and you have your 3 or 4 cattle, cattle are incredibly expensive, and I know this because my grandfather farmed with them, so they're very expensive. So I can understand the logic.
Yeah, but just hire a 12-year-old boy with a stick to run, keep look after them. You'll do it. Give him 50 rand.
I mean, then we do that, and then cases like Peter Sello happen.
Oh, yeah,
so we're just kind of what do we do?
So you were saying.
But from what I understand, there are 2 types of traditional healers. There are sangomas and then there are inyangas. Basically, inyangas are mainly concerned with medicines that are made from plants, plant roots, and animals. So they're pretty much like herbalists, whereas sangomas diagnose, prescribe, and often perform rituals to heal a person physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. So sangomas are ancestrally designated diviners. But in modern times, colonialism, urbanization, apartheid, and transculturation has blurred the distinction between the two, and traditional healers tend to kind of just practice both arts. And it's estimated that there are 200,000 traditional healers in South Africa, and between 60% to 86% of South Africans actually visit traditional healers. Just to put this in perspective, I think there's 25,000 GPs, doctors in South Africa. So that's quite a big jump.
Yeah, dude, that number's a lot bigger than I expected it to be. I didn't expect so many people to I guess go in the route of traditional healing, because I'm so used to everyone wanting to go Western medicine.
Exactly. Yeah. So traditional healers can prescribe like traditional medicine to their patients, and African traditional medicine makes use of various like I said, natural products, many of which are like derived from trees and like roots and other plants and things. So this traditional medicine is referred to as muti. And when you hear the word muti, please don't freak out because it's actually like a very like widely used term that's derived from the Zulu word umuti. So the word muti isn't necessarily like linked to bad things or like witchcraft. Like at the end of the day, muti has been around for centuries and anything can be bad if it's in the wrong hands or like used with the wrong intentions. But where do we start the conversation about muti murder? Well, obviously, what is muti murder? So there's a deep-founded cultural belief that body parts make medicine more effective and that it can solve any problem from like poverty to health issues. So muti murder basically involves an illegal act. As the name implies, there is the death of another person involved, and the main aim of this muti is then to get human body parts and then to use it either as an ingredient in the muti or to like use it in some way that the person was instructed by the traditional healer. So basically, it can be blended with a bunch of different plants to like make it unrecognizable, or it can be left in its original form, such as a hand, and that will basically be used by a client for whatever purposes that they are instructed to use it. And like according to local beliefs, different body parts like symbolize different things. For example, breasts signify like good fortune, and an Adam's apple is used to silence people. Eyes are taken to improve vision, and skulls provide protection to those who bury them. Then we have hands that are buried palm up in front of the business to bring money to the business. Human muti can also then be mixed with herbs to smear on products for sale. Or there was even a case once where a person who owned a hair salon placed body parts in the wall of the salon, which would apparently have made the business very successful. But again, typically when we refer to muti, we speak about herbs, roots, and just traditional medicines. So basically, just like it doesn't contain human or like human tissue. But with this being said, I feel that we need to distinguish between like traditional healers who are playing like a positive role in society and like guiding people and prescribing herbal medicines and just like in general helping people. But then obviously there is that handful of like air quotes traditional healers that do take part in terrible acts of like mutilation and using an individual's tissues for muti. And typically when it comes to the harvesting of body parts, they're usually like sourced through third parties, like I said earlier, and these third parties are tasked with finding the item that is required for these like bad or like evil traditional healers. And then I actually heard something very interesting on this podcast that Ash and I listened to. It's called Profiler. And they were basically saying that when they come across traditional healers, they say, or like the traditional healer says, like, please don't use the word traditional healer because what these people are like doing isn't traditional healing, it's witchcraft, and you should be calling them witchcraft.
You mean witches?
Yes, that is what I meant. But witchcraft is about harming people. So someone's gonna get hurt, but of course, then on the other side, he talks about witchcraft or witches, and then people tell him that he doesn't like understand traditional African belief systems and like that type of things. So now he just kind of refers to traditional healers as either good or bad. And like I said, a majority of traditional healers are good. And in Profiler, they were also saying that a lot of traditional healers have actually helped them to like catch criminals. So when we go back to 2002, were in Krugersdorp, and news became known to the police that an individual was offering to actually sell a human head that they had in their possession. And now this is very unusual because, as we know, the traditional healer usually instructs his trainee or a middleman to go get this. But in this man's case, he was in possession of a head and he wanted someone to buy it. So basically, the police requested a traditional healer to put it out that he was interested. And then this traditional healer obviously agreed to work with the police. And traditional healer, suspect, they meet. And the traditional healer's I want the head. And the other guy's sick, I'll take you to where the head is. And obviously, police were right behind them. So as soon as this guy who was in possession of the head pointed out the head, police arrested him. So this guy just wanted cash and he went and killed a homeless man and cut off his head. And then just to put out word so that people could buy it from him. And obviously, you know the rest of the story. The philosophy behind Muti murder is that for every animal part you could use in a traditional medicine, there's a human body part that is its equivalent. And this would obviously get you what you want faster or more certainly. So yeah, if you really want something badly, then the human equivalent of the ingredient can get you what you want a lot faster. So typically what you would find in a Muti murder is that the main thing that is missing is body parts. So essentially that's the first stepping stone to identifying whether something was Muti related or not. And typical things that would be missing are male or female, genitals, cut off breasts, hands, heads, and atlas bones. And an atlas bone is basically the bone in your neck that your head rests on. It's also actually pretty rare to find a Muti victim that is naked. Most likely what will happen is the clothing is removed in order to just access the specific body part that is needed. And also in a lot of instances, Muti victims will be near water because water is very symbolic. It can refer to a way of cleaning blood that is on the killer's hands, or water symbolically cleanses one's sins. So like I said, Muti murders take place to gather specific body parts to make the Muti more powerful. And in a lot of these cases, it's usually young individuals in their 20s who are relatively healthy that are killed. But obviously it's not limited to them. And here's why it's actually younger individuals that get killed. So human ingredients are said to make the Muti more powerful, especially when it's taken from a victim while they're alive, because then it contains their life essence. I also heard that crime expert Kobus Jonker said that it's done while the victims are alive, because the more they scream, the more powerful the Muti is going to be. And a very interesting fact is that old people generally won't be killed because they're close to becoming ancestors themselves. And if they pass away, they can come back and make your life super difficult. And when it comes to who can be killed, relatives or strangers can be killed for Muti. For example, there was a case where a traditional healer actually killed her own daughter. And 98% of the time, the victims are Black. And now that we understand that there's a difference between traditional healers and witch doctors and what human Muti involves, we can ask the question of, is there a difference between ritual murder and Muti murder, or are they the same thing?
Okay, so just break this down for me. What exactly is a ritual murder?
So we're going to get into that now, but Muti murder is not a ritual murder. So the big difference is that in Muti murder, the main aim isn't to kill someone. The main aim is to get body parts, and in the process, the person usually dies. So they're just kind of collateral. I mean, there probably have been instances where the person survives, but basically the success of the act is whether the person walks away with the body parts, because this is what they were tasked to go and get. Whereas ritual murder is more like the sacrifice of a person. You set out to end the life of of the person, you could be offering up that person as a sacrifice, whereas Muti murder, the aim is to get a body part, and death is just kind of the secondary event that takes place in the process. So it's important that we all understand that it's not an accepted process. I say, like, again, and the reason why I wanted to give the difference between Muti murder and ritual murder is because when we look at the media, a lot of the times they'll be like, there was a ritual murder, and then it actually wasn't a ritual murder, it's a Muti murder. So keep in mind always there's a difference between Muti murder and ritual murder.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and the newspapers, like I said, often they get it very mixed up. But what's interesting from actually a psychological perspective is that the belief system kind of like becomes a justification, and this is often why people perpetrate these crimes, and they don't seem particularly like remorseful about that, what they've done. I mean, some of these criminals have been like interviewed and stuff, and they straight up just said like, yeah, they would do it again. They say it's what they believe. Like, it's what they believe in, and they say their belief system tells them it's okay, and it tells they, like I said, it's a thing of like, it tells me it's okay, so I can do it. And then at the end of the day, there are mass bombings and mass shootings because of like belief systems. People can abdicate their responsibilities if they believe there's some higher point or some higher power to like what they're doing. And at the end of the day, people mustn't be out here thinking that this is primitive behavior, because it happens in not such primitive societies in like a lot of instances. Like, look at what happened in the early 90s in like Bosnia with the mass murders of countless people because of their religious differences to another group. And I mean, look at Hitler. Like, there's a lot of stuff like this that happened. I mean, there's Rwanda as well with the Hutus and the Tutsis, where there was the massive mutilation and killing, like, and genocide thing like going on. So we find so many reasons to kill each other, and often religion, culture, and tradition are at the end of the day the center of these things. One of the key takeouts is that when it comes to culture and tradition, there are certain things that are valuable and should be kept and encouraged and sustained as a part of our society, but there are certain things that do need to be stamped out. And a lot of people get very like weary to speak about culture and tradition because no one wants to cross like a line or cross a boundary. But this conversation is a lot easier when it comes to things like people being murdered, because people will agree that yes, we are against like the murder of people. But it gets a bit more different when you start talking about culture and like patriarchal society and the whole women don't have a say thing. It starts to clash with like constitutional beliefs. Then it obviously gets more touchy and difficult to have those conversations. But I think, like I said earlier, even traditional healers are saying this type of stuff shouldn't be happening and it's wrong. So it shouldn't be taking place. So Ash, do you think we'll ever like get rid of like the bad parts like of culture and tradition, if I can put it that way?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Just mainly because there's always going to be those people who want to take like the easiest route, and I guess like the more risky, or to put it in like, I guess, basic terms, the bad route to get what they want. And also, not to sound like a hippie, but you like yin and yang. Like, there's going to be some good and there's going to be some bad. I think it's just one of those things.
Exactly. Like, you can't ever have one without the other. Like, people have the ability to, like, pervert almost anything. And this is the reason that, we can't educate people enough. Like, educating people that are rooted deeply in tradition and cultural practice is the first step, like, we can take to, like, eradicating, like, this bad part of culture. And, like, in no instance is murdering another human being being, like, endorsed by your culture. And what we basically also need to do is we need, like, traditional healing societies, good traditional healers, and like public figures speaking out that murder is not part of traditional healing and it will not get you what you want, and it shouldn't be part of tradition or culture. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Be sure to check out our social media for more episodes, case-related content, and other riveting info.
We'd also like to give a massive shout out to Christian Putter for creating our theme song. Be sure to check out more of his work on Instagram at Christian_Putter.
And then we would also just like to thank Anthony Catano for creating our album art. So be sure to follow him at @AntCatano on Instagram.
And lastly, we'd like to give a huge shout out to VU Media for helping produce this podcast. Be sure to follow them on Facebook and Insta at VU_Media SA.